The comments are going to be, I have no idea actually what we're going to get, but I've seen all manner of things.
Oh, okay.
Been posting a lot over the past month and have received all manner of different opinions, you know, even
Is that
today.
good or bad?
I think the general reaction has been very.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I hear myself.
Oh yeah, I just muted that. Hold
Gotcha.
on.
Um, yeah, the overwhelming reaction has been sympathetic to, Palestinian liberation and
Mm-hmm.
um, even across like some different perspectives of it. I have gotten, a lot. There was especially around October 7th. I got a lot of, you know, shame on you type stuff. I've had a bunch of Zionists on the page here and there.
Mm.
I've had, not necessarily as many Zionists as I've had like, just liberal, like sympathetic to Israel opinions. I've had folks. I've also had some folks that have tried to sneak the anti-Semitism into
Oh
just
yeah,
like
yeah.
I had to
I
remove a
wouldn't even.
comment. Yeah,
Yeah, I wouldn't even entertain that. That's it. We're way past it.
it's just not
Like,
even worth being at the table. So I'm trying to be diligent about removing and hiding people a lot. Which I got some comments about
mm,
like you're censoring. What's going on? So I
yeah,
guess I'm flattered to have been thought about to be important enough to censor people. I guess on my
yeah.
page.
No, honestly, yeah. I don't know. For me, it's not an issue. Like I've been there, done that, literally my whole life.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah. But you definitely it's okay to hide them and delete and whatever and block. It's
Yeah.
your own peace of mind. It's not really censoring. Like we've been through this discussion over and over. Yeah, it's not worth interacting with. Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to moderate. If there's a
Mm.
public
Mm-hmm.
conversation happening on my platform, I
Mm-hmm.
want to do my best to moderate it so that stuff that, a lot of it can be dangerous because people use this rhetoric. I mean, you've seen all of it. We've seen all of it over the past month. Right now, it's the from the river to the sea. It's a genocidal chant type stuff. Like they
That's
just,
so funny when it happened. Like it's so new. I've never like we have been saying this for a very, very, very long time. And then suddenly now, they're like, oh, it's a genocidal. Like, what are you talking about?
you want
This
to
is
eradicate all
literally,
Jews. Yeah.
yeah, no.
I mean, it's the same tactic as like somebody else pointed this out. Many have of the all lives matter. You're saying Black Lives
Mm,
Matter. You think my life doesn't
hmm
matter, and then it was me
hmm
too. You want to eradicate all men. You want to destroy masculinity, and it's the same tactic that the reactionaries do all the time.
Yeah, it's textbook at this point, I think. It's very like we have been through this multiple times. Like
Because you have
it
to
happened. It happens and then you're like, I've been here before. Like I've been through this exact situation
exact
before.
situation, and yet it's
Yeah.
still so compelling to people. I think what's the most dangerous is the people that are like, well, the fact that somebody says that it could be means that you should stop, and the fact that you haven't stopped because some people think that it could be means that you are actually a terrorist. And it's
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, so we're completely setting the parameters of other people's ideas
Yeah. Yeah.
and
I
basing them
think
on nothing.
that's
Yeah.
I think that's one of my biggest pet peeves about this, about what's going on, is that people tend to over intellectualize and over discuss the semantics and the
Hmm.
details and everything. And I'm like, what are we doing? Like, this is not the point. We're straying away. It's like going on a tangent in a conversation and then leaving the main point behind, which is probably going to happen a lot today. But, you know, I digress. This is something that I completely, it just bothers me so much. I'm like, why are we intellectualizing this? Why are we going on and off about having these like statements of like, oh, it should be this, it should be that? Like, no, it's very clear cut, it's black and white.
Yep.
Let's just
It's genocide.
mobilize.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a genocide. That's it, period. So,
There's an
yeah.
insistence on people wanting to call things complicated, and the truth about things like complexity is that there's always complexity in everything,
Mm,
and there can be a use to acknowledging complexity, like when we analyze aspects of Palestinian history, of aspects of
Of
the
course.
occupation. There are some
Yeah.
parts that we can see as more complex than others, and da da da. But there's also a way that you can analyze everything pretty simply, and
Yeah.
especially when we're talking about genocide. I feel like having a simple declaration of being against
Yeah.
genocide
Yeah.
is
It's
pretty
just
good.
it. Yeah. 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 For me, it's just like the part that I'm talking about when they over intellectualize, it's just like, talking about like the terms and you should
Yeah,
say this and not that. And again, going back to the whole anti-Semitism thing and the whole terrorism thing and the whole like it's armed resistance. That's what it is.
yeah,
It's very simple. So
yeah,
um yeah, I think it's we're pretty much on the same page with that. So and I think what's nice is that seeing public opinion sway a lot. Like at first it was very much like everybody I think was very afraid
yeah,
of being like, oh, I don't know if this is okay or not. I don't know like what side am I on? What am I supporting? What am I not supporting? And for a second there in the
yeah,
beginning, I remember I was also afraid of stating my public opinion
yeah.
because I was like, okay, are people going to think I'm heartless or
Right.
vicious or, or just like a terrorist if I actually put my opinion on there? And then with time, I started to notice, you know what? Yeah, no, people are getting it, I think, a lot more and waking up to it. And despite how painful it's been and how terrible it's been, it does give us a little bit of hope in the sense that um for the longest time, for as long as I could remember growing up, we learned a lot about the Palestinian cause and about the occupation. I mean, it's been in our curriculum and in our families, and it's like a topic of discussion at the dinner table. It's very much an open thing because, again, majority of our population is Palestinians that have moved to here
You're in
and
Jordan.
enjoyed it. Yeah. And uh, the thing about it is that when you go abroad and then when you talk to people who are not as educated on it, who are not as knowledgeable, and then you try to explain and they think you're crazy, they're like, that's not happening. Like, that's not a thing. And then you try and
Yeah.
explain to them that Zionism is entrenched into every aspect of your life in ways that, sometimes you're even surprised by. And then they call you a conspiracy theorist or like you're crazy or you're paranoid. So the fact that people are seeing it now, I'm pretty happy about that. So, because you see it, in everything that we buy or do or contribute financially to, like it's all involved with the Israeli government, one way or another. So,
Yeah, I think the concept even of craziness and insanity is like something that is very structurally entrenched on oppressing people because it's not a coincidence, for instance, that oppressed peoples throughout have had their colonization justified by them being described as savages, as being unable to take care of themselves,
mm,
as being, insane, as being unreasonable. I mean, this is the same thing that is being used to describe Hamas right now. Is they're just unreasonable. They no amount of capitulation to them will be good. You have to just destroy everything that's associated with them. I mean, it's
yeah,
completely irrational, even if you buy the argument. But the argument in and of itself is also just false because it's not a matter of simply striking viciously at people just cause. I mean, there's a clear
mm,
intent. And the
yeah,
point is not one of being like, well, everything that Hamas has ever done is good. But it's a matter of the fact that Hamas, as an armed resistance party, is using, violent means in order to resist its colonizer. And it has been, if you don't want that to happen, colonization is the cause of this. It's the sole only cause of this. There
yeah.
is no reason for somebody who is being victimized to be blamed for how they respond to their victimization.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And on top of all that is that again, they are an Islamist movement and they are Muslim and there are certain rules that are adhered to in combat or in
Right.
resistance or in war or whatever.
Right.
And people tend to forget that. They tend to be like, oh, like they're just these crazy Muslim terrorists, blah, blah, blah. Like they don't care about life and all that. But clearly they are adhering by those rules with the way that they treat their hostages or prisoners or whatever you want to call them. Um, and they've said so in interviews after they've been released. Like they treated us very well and very respectfully.
Yeah.
Um, and while a lot of people didn't like had very I want to say different feelings about the October 7th attack, it has been proven again that it wasn't actually them. And things came out like articles were that they've stated and videos were shown and analyses of like how a lot of the deaths that happened were due to friendly fire and the IOF not knowing what the hell it is that they're doing and freaking out because again the two I want to say what's the word I'm like losing my language so Hamas and the IOF in comparison to one another in ground combat leagues apart
Right.
leagues apart like and that's why they kept postponing the ground invasion
Yeah.
over and over because they cannot uh they cannot they can't go against them and win. It's impossible. So
That's why they bomb.
yeah,
It's
exactly. That's
easy.
why
Just
they're
press a button.
yeah, yeah. That's why they're depending on the airstrikes. They're hoping that that'll do the job and it'll pressure Hamas into uh just giving up and returning the hostages. And what's funny is that they've actually I dropped them. They've offered to release the hostages again just for a ceasefire. They're like, we'll release all the foreign Israelis for a ceasefire of 5 days, but the Israelis who only have the Israeli passport will release if you just like give in aid and release our prisoners,
Our prisoners. Well, it's our hostages.
the
You know,
hostages. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And a lot of those hostages aren't only Palestinian, by the way. There are Syrian hostages, Lebanese hostages, Jordanian
Brazilian.
hostages, Brazilian. I did not
I
know
had
about
heard
Brazilian
about,
hostages.
yeah, Brazilian hostages as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And yes, some of them are former Hamas leaders, like pretty important ones. But at the end of the day, like majority of them are civilians and children and
Children.
women. So yeah, yeah, yeah. So I don't know, man. It's a tough spot, but I think what the thing is that this they've put them in an impossible situation. It's really like very much pulling the veil away and showing people like, yeah, this is what you signed up for. Like this is who you're supporting. This is who you think is in the right.
Right.
In reference to the Israeli government and the IOF. But yeah, but again, going back to the rules, yeah, there are rules to combat, to resistance, and the problem is that Hamas are trying to follow these rules, but Israel is not at
Right.
all. Like they are not honoring any combat rules like that are either religious or political, like in the law, international law. So
Yeah.
what do you do in that situation? Honestly, like what do you do in that situation?
Well,
So,
in a sense, it would be, and something we talked about just before we went live is, in a sense, it is this that we have that has to be done, right? And I even caution away from saying we because it's not as if I'm on the front lines doing this,
oh no,
or that
I get
again,
that.
like
Yeah.
it's not even about having a specific affiliation with Hamas, because there are many different, first of all, political parties and organizations in Palestine,
Yeah,
and many of them have severe disagreements with Hamas.
absolutely. Yeah.
The point is more so this the actions that have taken place have been to have come from a place of ultimately not having another choice.
Hmm.
Any diplomatic barrier, any diplomatic doors that have tried to be opened by any Palestinian organizations, whether it be Hamas or other organizations, have been shut down violently by the Israeli government time and time again.
Yep.
And there's a whole history behind these things that leads to us seeing now what's happening, and nobody likes what's happening, but
Hmm.
you can't argue that it's not being done for a purpose, and that purpose, I don't want to necessarily say it's working, but
Mm,
that it has a particular goal, which is to
yeah.
confront the Israeli government with the fact that it's, with its failures,
Yeah.
to protect its own people. Because of course, this is not an issue just about. I mean, it's mostly about the colonization of Palestine. This is what it's really about, but it's also about endangering people everywhere, including within
Hmm.
Israel, but also outside of Israel, of course, in Lebanon as well, and across the world, right? And there has to be a point of, unfortunately, people coming and taking up, violent positions. So people having to use the resort to violence, resort to kidnappings, in order to resist oppressive states. And it's not, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to be cautious with what I say, because um, it's not I feel like it's just one of those things that's beyond the realm of moralizing, is the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I understand. No, for sure. Um, no, I agree with that, honestly, because again, yeah, no choice has been given, no choice has been left. And honestly, if you look at some of the footage and like, we're seeing the stories of the people who are losing their families, losing everybody, their entire bloodlines completely erased. I think so far it's been more than 950 families completely erased from the registry. And I don't know if they have any other relatives like outside of Gaza, so we don't know what's gonna happen. And on top of that, there's like these kids that are left without families. And I saw one post about this one kid who lost his brother, and he said, um, I'm going to enlist tomorrow with Hamas because again, this is the way that they're getting radicalized. And
Yeah.
it really got me thinking about other different radical movements that have come out of the Middle East or uh, people that have been deemed extremists, right? Now, in some ways, yes, a lot of them have been like super extreme, where it's like it's inexcusable, like ISIS or the Taliban, right?
Right.
But then again, you start to think, okay, but what caused this radicalization? What is
Right.
causing these movements? What is causing these different resistance groups to crop up? And it's very obvious why, because of like the destruction and the besiegement that's happening in the Middle East. And
Yeah.
and yeah, and it's bringing back a lot of flashbacks to what happened in Iraq, where the Abu Ghraib prison and the torturing and killing at least 1 million Iraqi civilians. It's a lot, So I mean, I know in Iraq because my mom's from there, and during that time she had a really hard time. I was 7, so I didn't know what the hell was going on. All I remember was like I would see my mom crying like all the time and getting phone calls like, oh, like we lost this person, we lost that person and stuff like that. And um nowadays when I talk about it with my grandparents, they're like, it's like a complete layer of people was just completely erased from Iraq. Like a complete like a whole sector of people is just gone. And with them, the the political knowledge, the history, the education, all of it, the history, it's just gone.
Yeah.
So seeing that happen over and over and over and over in the Middle East is just like, what have we done really to deserve this, right?
Right.
And so I don't blame anyone taking on armed resistance or fighting back because at this point it's like, what else are we gonna do? And I think a lot of people are getting radicalized as well right now, like in many
Yeah.
parts of the world, because they're seeing how it's connected to their own oppression
Yeah.
and to the ways that they are suppressed and oppressed and just subjugated in their own lands. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
So
we've seen direct action efforts in the U.S. and in the U.K.
mhm.
stopping Israeli ships from undocking, right? We've
Yeah,
seen these kinds of actions, as well as, boycott. BDS has come back into popular discourse, and with like a vengeance. Like it's very much
I'm
back.
very happy about that actually. Very, very happy about BDS
Yeah.
that it's back. Yeah.
I mean, it's also, And one of the most moving things that I have seen so far in the protest movements, which yesterday was, they were tremendous. Like there was a
Oh yeah.
gigantic protest in
Yeah.
DC. I saw there was one apparently that was of 2 million in Indonesia. I mean,
Hmm.
it's happening all over. And one of the biggest ones at first, they were protests in Egypt as well, which hadn't happened
Yeah.
for a great amount of time. And there was that tweet that said, you don't understand, Palestine is freeing us. Like, we haven't
Hmm.
seen this kind of action in, I think it was in Cairo, and like so long. We've never been able to have this kind of expression to our own government, and because of the Palestinian people, it has given us a door to all come together like this. It's constantly a sort of a fact of life to me that when you stand with the oppressed and when you stand on the side of liberation, there are rewards. There are sometimes material rewards, sometimes not material rewards. There's a lot of suffering that goes along with it, but so much of the stuff that you get from losing, for instance, like McDonald's, like what are you really
Yeah.
what are you really losing
Honestly,
by not
that
doing McDonald's, you
I've
know?
heard like, oh my God, some people that were tweeting that like, oh, that McChicken was calling my name. I'm like, are you
Bro,
serious? Like, what are you talking about?
bro.
No, because truly, I truly agree with the whole, oh, Palestine is freeing us. Because what do you mean you can't do without McDonald's ever? Are you serious right now? You know what I mean? Like, it's blowing my mind. But I think also like what's happening is it's I think bringing a lot of attention to people about how there's very much a lack of local places, like
Right.
local spots that you can actually go to
Yeah.
and easily and in a way that's accessible. Because for us here, like in Jordan, people actually rarely go. Like people do go to McDonald's a lot, but only because they like it, not because they have to. And
Right.
there's a ton of local spots. Like I don't even know how to explain to you the amount of local spots that have opened up. I think since
Yeah.
COVID, even it like doubled. And then there's like the coffee places and the different like food and beverage and service places. Like there's just a lot of places that you can go to that are local. So it hasn't been very difficult, you know, getting away from the franchises and going for local made stuff. Even like Pepsi and Coke and whatever, we have a ton of other options. So it's been fine. But then I start thinking about when I was living in Canada, and man, like to get a cup of coffee, it's impossible not to get something that's not from Timmy's,
Right.
from Starbucks, or like Costa, like or Second Cup, I mean, not Costa. Costa's here.
Yeah.
Second Cup, right? Those three are the only three that are around. And then the local spots are all downtown and they're in like the most inaccessible places, or like you just have to know about them magically. So it's been very, I think, eye-opening to people about just how strong these corporations are, their franchises, how they literally control every aspect of the economy in a way.
Yeah.
So I think like realizing it is the first step. And then moving forward, people could, again, money talks, divert their finances towards local options and give more money back to people so that they're able to open up different branches and expand and do better so that these franchises are obsolete eventually. That's the goal, is to make them obsolete,
Yeah. I
I
mean,
think.
part of that has also been the support of unions. I mean,
Yeah.
we've seen some news articles come out and people tweeting like, um, incredulously almost about like, well, obviously, McDonald's is not doing these sales or whatever. Like there was Starbucks closing a bunch of locations, and people have been like, "Hey, look, it's working! It's working! The boycotting is working!" And that's not really what
Yeah.
that's.
Yeah.
Um,
It doesn't work that
it doesn't
fast.
really work that fast, or even in that
No.
noticeable of a way. But what it's interesting is that a lot of the reason, for instance, that the Starbucks might be closing these locations is because of the continuous popularity of Starbucks unionizations, which causes them to try to take as a punitive measure this kind of, just removing the stores to get altogether, getting rid of the jobs. And then you have all these
Yeah.
Starbucks closing down their operations. And then you have an opportunity for new stores to come in place of those Starbucks. and
Exactly.
and then you have
Yeah.
more opportunities for people to not use Starbucks. So it's like this kind of work also, I mean, unionization, I think, is one of the key things that we're going to have to look at, especially in a state like the US,
Yeah.
to, to as a form of resistance, because I mean, union movements have always been extremely powerful actors on the sides of the oppressed, unionized laborers, but especially now, it's like they're completely intolerant to it. They think of
Mm.
these corporations think of themselves so powerful and so, they've mechanized themselves so much to be all controlling of people's labor and people's consumption, that a modicum of resistance in the form of unionization, they can't even tolerate it. They just like move, they like shut down. So they're, in a sense, like these forces we often talk about as being so powerful that they do control everything in a sense, but they're also so much weaker in some other senses. And I think a similar
Hmm.
thing might be even comparable with when it comes to the Israeli state, because as the Israeli state has continued to receive all these just billions and billions of dollars in funding from the U.S. alone, let alone from other Western quote unquote developed nations, and continue to expand its military forces, it just keeps taking L after L. Like it just seems like the Israel, for one, the Netanyahu government it has been in this state of complete like lack of dwindling popularity with the Israeli citizens over the
Yeah.
years, especially over the past couple of months, and especially since October 7th.
Hmm.
And that's also happening within the administration itself. You've have people resigning their posts in these, I'm pretty sure in the Israeli government, but I know that it's happening in the U.S. I know that's happened
Yeah.
in the United Nations. There was this one diplomat who put out that really viral statement about
Yeah, I've read it. It
genocide,
was, yeah.
and it's showing that even as these powers are becoming more and more powerful, in fact, they're also kind of fracturing a lot, and they're losing a lot of their ability to. One of the most powerful things about capitalism is that has always been that it's been able to adapt to things, but it seems as if it's being less and less willing to adapt,
Yeah.
which is, I don't know, maybe super theoretical jibber jabber for me,
Hey,
but
this is my jam. Theory
yeah,
is my jam. I love it. So,
yeah,
yeah, but there's this other thing also that I think is playing a part in it is the paranoia that exists. I've been thinking about it lately a lot. There's this sense of paranoia that I feel is just super present
yeah,
in Western governments.
yeah,
Um, and in like the what's the word? In like the white mindset, like the mindset of like specifically white people or people who are like um leaning more towards like white supremacy and like Zionism and stuff like that, or like that are super, super, super patriotic, not to the land or the country, but like the government. You know what I mean?
right,
Like, so they have this sense of paranoia that I feel comes with all of them. And it was very, very present in after the Cold War when, just the mention of the word socialist will have them break out in hives.
yeah,
Just the word. And it's present to this day.
yeah,
And the same thing exists in Israel, but their their paranoia is more towards like the Palestinians and then, the threat of being exiled, the threat of being kicked out again, the threat of not
yeah.
having a home and stuff like that. And they have a belief, apparently, and I read about it recently also. There's this thing called the eighth decade curse. Is that me? Are the cars me or
Maybe.
you?
I heard one
I
horn
think.
on your side.
Oh, okay, it's me because I have the window open.
Oh,
But yeah, so they have this thing called the eighth decade curse, and a lot of them believe in it, of how it is said, I guess, I think it's said in the Torah or otherwise that there's like a prophecy or something that they are not to have any state or any land that would last more than 8 decades. How it always crumbles before they finish the 8 decades or by the time they reach 8 decades. And they're on their 75th year right now.
right.
And I've read a couple of articles and stuff like from Israeli journalists and Palestinian journalists about how there's this underlying tension and stress that has been,
Wow.
you know, pervasive throughout the country and the government.
Right.
And multiple prime ministers have stated or talked about the 8 decade curse, including Netanyahu. So they've all talked about it, they've mentioned it, and they keep saying, "Oh, we're not going to let it happen. We're not going to let it happen." But I mean, look where we're at right now.
I mean, in a certain sense, it looks as if they'll be fine, but in a certain sense, it doesn't. It's just one of these things where it's such a tenuous thing. I mean, the fact is
Yeah,
that it's not really been any kind of liberatory project for Jewish people internationally. It just hasn't
it
been.
hasn't. It hasn't.
Jewish people have overwhelmingly. I mean, you see a lot of popular discourse about Jewish people being afraid in the U.S. and the anti-Semitism, and I'm sympathetic to clearly the fact that some people want to hang on to liberatory issues like this and use it to spread bigotry. And of course, anti-Semitism and particularly anti-Jewish anti-Semitism is something that we see all the time in the U.S. It's something we see globally. It's something that's normalized in so many ways, and so it's
Yeah,
on one hand, I'm sympathetic to that being something that people are concerned about, but it's also such a red herring in many ways when it's invoked in this way,
yeah,
because
it's not like a Jewish fear. It's a Zionist
it's a
fear.
Zionist fear.
Yeah, it is not a Jewish fear, to my
Because
knowledge.
I mean, it's not as if the Israeli state has been very kind to Jewish people.
It hasn't
It
at
just
all.
simply
Oh
hasn't. It
no.
hasn't been, especially Jewish people who are not European, who are not
Mm-hmm.
white, who are not white American. It's
Yeah.
particularly, I mean, the way that they treat, rabbis using the language of Yiddish or other Jewish languages, is the way that they treated Ethiopian Jews, the way that
Mm-hmm.
black people are treated in Israel to this day, and brown people.
Yeah.
There's all this talk about, oh, well, how you could you support Palestine if you're gay? If you could go over there, they wouldn't like you. Like,
Oh,
guess
that
what they
bothers
would?
me so
What do you think
much.
people would do in Israel, right?
Oh,
And also that point is
it's
also
not like Israel
entirely.
are also okay with gay
They're
people
not
either.
exactly.
Like
I mean,
they're not.
they're
It's
not
not legal.
they're not safe at all for gay Jews, for trans Jews. Like what do we think? It's not a shock or a surprise or a coincidence that these these pro-Israel rallies that we see sometimes, which are completely dwarfed by the pro-Palestinian rallies,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
the rallies that we see for Israel are completely consisted of affluent white people.
Always.
It's
Yeah.
always that, because it is, what we see in this movement for, this Zionist movement, especially in the incarnation that we see today, is a white supremacist movement. We see a movement that is continuously hostile to non-white
Exactly.
people, especially including non-white Jews, especially including even white Jews who are not 100% supportive of the Israeli government. Um,
And I've mentioned this before, by the way, like sorry to cut you off, but like I've
yeah,
said it before, is that literally Zionism and white supremacy are one and the same.
right.
This is very much a racial issue, and very much is the root of all evil, in my opinion. Like even all of the talks about like religion and the Muslims and stuff, it's still racially
Yeah.
driven and motivated. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah,
um,
it's
and
capitalistically motivated. It's
yeah, also that, and people keep like saying like it's like as if they're saying like, oh, like, but like Jews weren't accepted into Palestine before, like they hate the Jews. No, there were a lot of Jews in Palestine that are like
there was
that
at
have
least,
lived there
I believe,
for
9% of the population, which would be like twice
yeah,
the amount of Asian Americans in the U.S. right now.
yeah, there was a lot of Jews, and even like the old coins that they had, like the I think they're called mills. It had three languages on it: English, Hebrew, and Arabic.
Yeah,
And it was like all the like three Abrahamic faiths lived in harmony there for a very long time.
yeah,
And
and
I
folks will
think
be
it's been,
amazed to find out what the Israeli forces did to those Arabic Jews during the
oh
Nakba.
my God, it's so brutal. Like they're actually especially brutal to them.
Especially
And
brutal,
I've
yes.
read and I've read certain articles and statements about how actually they're very resentful of Holocaust survivors.
Yeah.
And Zionists are super, super resentful of Holocaust survivors, which again, um, now that we're seeing what we're seeing now, not that surprising,
I mean, we saw a
because
clip the other day circulating on social media of this lady at a protest going up to a Jewish person
mm,
saying, "You should have been burned in the ovens. We should have left you there clearly because," and that's the kind of hostility that transcends even what we would understand as hostility, like a regular hostility towards Jews. Like that is another level.
mhm. And it is very sad. So I don't know,
Yeah,
like, but I am very happy with the way that everybody's kind of like coming together
they are.
and and you know understanding of like how what the conflict is, the history of it, and I'm surprised because I've seen a lot of like friends on Twitter, like mutuals or whatever, that were like, "Oh, I had no idea," and like, "This is the first time I've heard about this, and it's so horrible." And I'm like, "Oh my
Yeah,
God, you guys need to like catch up quickly. Like, there's so much work to
catch
be
up.
done." Yeah,
I mean,
like,
another one of the common sentiments that I've gotten tickled by is when people have pointed out like how many, for instance, pro-Israel people, when the attacks, well, when the military initiative happened on the 7th, the attacks, however you want to describe them, um, and around that time period, how many people were like, you can't speak right now. You guys have to go and do your reading and do your research first and understand what's really happening. And then people were basically like, okay, and then they did, and then we're like, oh, I actually don't like this even more now. Like I'm
yeah,
actually
yeah,
fully
yeah,
going out to I mean, even
yeah,
Macklemore. Like imagine we're living in a time when Macklemore is like on stage, just like standing for liberation. Like this is a different level of popularity.
yeah,
But I even to say that
absolutely.
Macklemore is like super popular, but like it's Macklemore. Like how does this happen? Like
Yeah,
of all
yeah,
credit to Macklemore, but like it's just like it just goes to show like how many people, like how common and like how anybody can see it and be radicalized for the liberation of Palestinians. It's
hmm
so simple, and the mechanism that stops people is a fear. I think a fear
yes,
of repudiation by others, a fear of losing their jobs or their money, a fear of social ostracization, a fear of going
yeah,
against their families. Like all these fears are really what cause people to create these kinds of backwards logics that
yeah, yeah, yeah.
rely on gotchas that don't really get anybody and rely on rhetoric and rely on misrepresentations of facts to push an idea of this is something that is true, and simply anybody who's on it's just fearful, and it's sad in that way because it's like
Yeah.
it's not helping anybody. I mean, this you can't look at what the state of Israel has done and think this is good. This is for a
Yeah.
common greater good. Like, in
I
what
think
world?
I think honestly the people who are saying that it's good or like supportive of it have something to gain out of that.
Right.
That's the only reason why I think, or they're just truly evil people. Like those are the only, for me right now, the only two possible explanations. And we've seen people get paid to actually
Yeah.
make up statements about and in support of Israel and all that. And I think though, like the way you said that a lot of people are afraid because they're afraid of like uh again like losing their jobs, of being ostracized, of many different things that could happen to them if they do speak up or like resist. And I think one good thing that one solution to that is like creating community with
Yeah.
others who are supportive of the cause
Yeah.
and that are willing to help each other out in these moments, um and are willing to kind of like, even though there's a bit of suffering involved in it and a little like uncertainty, to just keep going. You know what I mean? And I think that's key right now. It's really, really key to like not just take up the cause for a couple of weeks and help people out when it's like
When
hot
it's
news or a hot
hot. Yeah.
topic, but to keep going even when it's not, and to be consistent with it, to be consistent with the boycott, to be consistent with raising awareness, and I think it's very important also to leave the echo chamber that you sometimes find yourself in,
Yeah.
and educate others who are not in that echo chamber. Like
Yeah.
bring them in, you know what I mean? And let them know what's going on. Because
Yeah.
again, with numbers, we will have a better support system and a better community, I think. So I've seen it happen here because people were like, okay, if anybody gets fired from McDonald's or Starbucks, if it goes out of business or whatever, we have jobs for everybody, come and we'll
Yeah.
hire you immediately. So that part has been really, really nice. Um, and I
Yeah.
think though, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, in a sense, I don't really know much about how to mobilize in the US or in Canada because here, like everybody is pro-Palestine. Everyone,
It's
like we're
like
not in
not
a
even a question.
not even a question. Like we're all majority of us are Palestinians or of Palestinian origin or whatever. And the Jordanians who are not are still supportive most of the time. The only way that they're not supportive sometimes could be like, oh, like, this is getting tiring, like nothing's gonna happen, blah, blah, blah.
Hmm.
There are a few that are a bit like, oh, like we don't like Palestinians. But that's just like old feud stuff that have to do with 67 and
Right.
but it's been very rare. Like I haven't seen much of it. So,
Yeah. The
in a
Arab world
sense,
is, generally overwhelmingly pro-Palestine. It's more the people than it is about the states.
yeah, yeah,
But the
yeah.
people have, I mean, even during the World Cup, like in Qatar, there was like
Yeah,
so much of like free Palestine, like so
that
many
was so
banners.
fun. I always love it when that happens. That's my favorite part.
Yeah, because it's so awkward for these powers that be to be like, oh, I guess we should move the camera, but then we also are now like fully like suppressing people who are saying to liberate a state. That like this
Yeah.
is it's just
Yeah.
like this dynamic that's so hard. That's why people have to come up with these false logics because it's like otherwise you have to confront the fact that you're literally attacking people for defending of people being genocided. Like it's really just a wild thing to have to cognitive dissonance yourself out of.
Did you see the Zionist Playbook?
What do you mean? No, I don't think so.
So I saw it yesterday. Somebody shared it. I can't remember who shared it, but um, oh yeah, it was a friend of mine who actually, not a friend, but an acquaintance on Twitter who lives in Palestine in Bethlehem, and she shared the Zionist Playbook, and it's literally an 18 chapter document detailing to Zionists how to convince
Wow.
people of Zionism and like what to say, what not to say, how to answer questions, how to ask questions, how to phrase them the right way. It's ridiculous. And I was
Yeah.
so shocked to know that it exists. It's crazy. And it's very much giving cult. So, so I was like, okay. And then you realize that a lot of the lines that are in the playbook are used by the media. Like literally Pierce the other day literally used one of the questions and it was just like, oh my God, it's like they hand it to the
Yeah.
anchors and the news people before every interview or when they get the job. Like this
Yeah.
is how you should, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
and
really
it's so funny because it doesn't work. Like
crazy.
it's so ineffective. Like you know how bad like you have to like to have this amount of resources and to invest it fully into having people just repeat a certain amounts of talking points or at least to be bullied into complicity and to still for them to not do that, like that's just the level of which like people like humanity is just unkillable. Like
Yeah.
there's just no matter what you do, people's humanity will always emerge somewhere scuffling like nah, I'm just gonna turn this one down actually,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
I think for some time their propaganda was successful. There was a time when it
Yeah.
was. But I think now we've definitely reached a point where it's just not feasible anymore. It's not like nobody with a sane brain cell could really believe all this BS. And I think after seeing lie after lie after lie be debunked from their side, you start to approach their media and everything that they say with bad faith immediately.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that's something that the generation now or like our age group and like certain people also who are older that are already with the cause are just kind of like realizing like yeah we can't trust them like at
Yeah.
all. This is not what's happening. And and I know we keep saying that media literacy is dead and critical thinking is dead a lot of the time, but I think right
It's
now
really
it's
not.
showing that it's really not. It's really not. People like to be obtuse sometimes, but you know what? No, I think people are able to discern
Yeah,
between, yeah.
I think it's so easy for people. I think it's also very damning. Like it's very problematic, I would say, for people to constantly suggest that these issues come down to people's just a lack of intelligence, like a complete lack of, like a, oh, people just don't
Yeah.
have any media literacy, they're just not smart enough, everybody's just so dumb in the US, everybody's just so, it's like that is a position of hopelessness, right? It's
Hmm.
a position of the futility of the human condition, that we are just simply fundamentally too far gone, too dumb, too incapable of understanding what it means to be free and understanding what is right and what is wrong, which is just not true. And also, I think is its own form of, a kind of suppression, a kind of oppressed narrative, is to
Hmm.
consistently believe, well, it's just no hope. So if there's no hope, then what do you do? Right? Well, if there's no
Yeah.
hope, then you would just adapt and you just let things be. And I think the reality is, and I made this post a while ago about like how media literacy isn't really the problem. Um, it's not as if to say like there aren't issues of media literacy that should be clarified. It's not to say that there aren't, things that people need to work on that maybe have even, you can say, collectively gotten worse in terms of our ability to discern information and misinformation, and of course the rise of AI and all these different things. Like it is a skill set to some degree, but the core issue is not a matter of people's skill set not being sharp enough. The core
Hmm.
issue is a matter of people's intentions. It's a matter
Hmm.
of why people believe something versus why they don't. Because you
Hmm.
will explain to a person time and time again with all the reasoning that they would normally adhere to. It's the athletes that they support not being like supporting your point of view. It's the money being in a certain direction. It's the people that you don't like. It's literal videos of emaciated human beings, right? Like that's all the evidence you could ever need, and people will still be like, I
Yeah. Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
Hamas. It's like they will just lie. They're not doing this
Yeah.
because they genuinely believe it in the sense of like, oh, they've been presented with some sort of objective argument. Objectivity means nothing to them because the fear and the emotion and the dedication to a specific cause in their mind, like a specific safety, a specific approval, whatever it is, that is more important to them, and so they fundamentally can't accept the truth. Like they don't, until they free themselves of that, of thinking that they need that thing will hold them back from understanding the truth.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
Absolutely.
I want to talk to
Yeah.
you about we got I was planning to do this at the start, but we got into some conversation
We got her.
before. But we haven't introduced you yet.
Yeah.
So friends, this is
I,
my friend Taffy.
we jumped right
um,
into it.
we just jumped right into. I mean, it worked. I was
Yeah.
good. This is my friend Fatima, aka Taffy. Taffy I've known for some time, a few years, through
Yeah.
BTS fandom, and
Yeah.
we have talked a couple of different times, but in particular, Taffy is Palestinian and has spoken about a lot of what's going on her Twitter accounts, and has always been a strong advocate for her people. And I really was excited to be able to bring her on to talk today. And I'm curious, Taffy, if you would like to talk about yourself and introduce, yourself.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. 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 So I'm Fatima. Hello. Um, I am currently based in Jordan right now. I mean, I was born and raised here, and moved away for a few years during uni, and then came back, and now I live and work here. I am of Palestinian origin. My dad is from Palestine, and my mom is Iraqi. But my community, the community that I've been in and that I've stayed with and that I've been around has been major, like most of the time, majority of it is Palestinian. And that's the side that I'm more connected to, I think. But yeah, what else? Our family comes from Tul Karm, which is right now it's in the West Bank. Um, It's there's a village there called Anapta, and that's part of like my last name. And our last name literally means of Anapta. And that's often something that has happened from people that come from these villages where they take the name of the village and then they add of to it in Arabic, just to know what village they came from. For my grandparents, they took that last name because they actually moved from one village to the other, and lived elsewhere. So, and so they've lived there up until they lived there up until 67. At the time my dad was, I think, one and a half. And in 67, they were expelled in 67. But it was my grandma and my uncles that were expelled. My grandpa had already left prior to that because he was apparently, and I learned this recently, wanted by the British military, um, because he was part of the Palestinian military. And I have no idea what he was wanted for. My grandma was very, um, she didn't really, I don't know if she even remembers why, but I didn't know why. But yeah, so he had left earlier and went to Jordan. Um, and at the time they were actually, Jordan had annexed, um, the West Bank. So it was part of, it was like West Bank, East Bank. That's why it's called, I think, the West Bank. Um, and around, I think, 66, 67, yeah, they were expelled because they had, a grenade was thrown at their house. My grandma's brother, he sacrificed himself for their safety. Uh, may his soul rest in peace. And my grandmother at the time was pregnant with my uncle, the last one, and shrapnel hit her, and they had to move quickly and like leave. They were transferred to Kuwait, where she spent 7 months in the hospital. They had to amputate her leg, and then she gave birth, and then they went back to Jordan. And that's where they have been ever since, since 67, 68. They've been in Jordan. And then, yeah, that's where we were. Um, my mom eventually left, fled Iraq during the war, went to Jordan. That's where she met my dad. So that's basically how it's just been a whirlwind of generational trauma and war. Um, but it brought my family together. So yeah, that's basically the history of where my family's from and what it is.
Have you had the opportunity to go to the West Bank or to Palestine?
Unfortunately not. I've always wanted to go. I've always wanted to go to the West Bank and to see Palestine. I have a friend of mine. He's one of my best friends, and he grew up in Ramallah, and he moved here when he was 12. And we met when we were 15. So he would often go back and visit because he was able to. And he would just go to the village because his village is right next to where we're from. We're from neighboring villages. So he would take pictures and send them to me and stuff. But I never was able to go. Because the thing is that when you have a Jordanian passport and you don't have a Western passport, it's very difficult to actually enter, especially if they know that you come from a family that is from Palestine. It's just very brutal. There's a lot of like, you don't know what's going to happen at the border, at the checkpoints. You honestly have no clue what's going to happen. And I've heard a lot of horror stories from friends and family that have been there or tried to go. So we wanted to wait. We wanted to wait until we got the Canadian passport,
Right.
which I did get recently, but then yeah, COVID, and then right after, it's just been war after war after war, and a lot of problems. So yeah, I really hope to go one day. Hopefully when it's free. My dad refuses to go entirely. He's like, I will not take a visa to get permission from my occupier to go visit my home, and he just refuses to go back until it's free. So, um, I think we have a house there. My grandma mentioned that her mother-in-law's house, which they stayed at by the coast, is hopefully still there. I don't know if they demolished it or not, but
Mm.
when they left, it was still standing. So
Yeah.
fingers crossed. And yeah, yeah.
So it's, first of all, thank you for sharing your family story.
No, no problem.
It's one of these things that I find a lot of people don't understand until they dig into their family history what colonization does to people. I
Yeah.
think there's an abstract notion. It's especially seen when people make these arguments about, you know, getting over things and, oh well, this was in the past and now you have to, and now you have these opportunities now and you live in da da da, and there's like this attempt to, for one, focus on some type of objective material, like, here you're not there and you're not oppressed because you live in Canada, or because you live now you're in Amman, like, or whatever. And for one, it's not correct, because there are always material impacts that last through generations. When you
Mhm.
have your home taken away from you and your possessions taken away from you and your family members killed, kind of has a ripple effect. But there's also this understanding that I think comes when you finally come to terms with the oppression in your own family.
Mm.
And the, like, it's not just about your own family, for one, obviously. It's understanding how oppression, as for in this instance, colonization, how all these historical subjects actually have a real life and have had this real impact on who you are as a person, who your family are as people, and understanding that that is now your goal, is to liberate yourself and to liberate others from that
Yeah.
oppression. And it's something that I find is very important to my work. My, as a quick background, I get a lot of questions because I have my Dominican flag back here. I am Dominican, and I am also partially Chinese. My father is half Chinese and Dominican, and my mom is Dominican. And the Dominicans, we are from an island called Hispaniola, which we share with Haiti. And the Caribbean indigenous people were completely genocided. We are at a point where Puerto Rico has more vocal sort of about embracing their Taino heritage, and are at the point of, like, when news broke out a couple years ago that in a DNA test you could find a particular genome that was special potentially to people of Taino heritage. Puerto Ricans would celebrate when they would get that DNA test, like saying, like, oh, like, you have this in you, because that's how far we've been taken from our indigenous heritage. Like,
Mm.
we don't have any family, we don't have any language from it. I mean, we have family, of course, but all of our family speaks Spanish. All of the things that we know come from the post-colonial environment, which is very much designed to structure your whole life to chase the identity of your colonizer, the identity of the Spaniards, for instance. And in that sense is to chase something that's impossible, which is to create that type of self-loathing in human beings.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there is a condition to which all of us really benefit from acknowledging that, because up until that point, colonization is this sort of abstract idea, or this sort of historical fact that we kind of separate our personal lives and our individual lives from, and we just think of ourselves as these individuals that all these facts sort of surround. And in fact, we are all just pieces of this story, and
Mm.
we are all living this. This is all these things that we talk about as abstract things are just literally our lives. And so the way that we choose to handle our lives should not be based in trying to think of them as equal in the sense of the same as everybody else's, or the same as like something apolitical, but it are actually political entities, and we embody political things, and we embody social things, and through
Yeah.
that we have to liberate ourselves. So I bring all this up because I'm one of the things that's been talked about when it comes to Palestinians, and Gazans in the face of this unbelievable violence is their spirits, their ability to resist, their ingenuity, figuring out like to throw sand on white phosphorus to annul its effects, like just things that you couldn't even believe, like that you would think were made up in a movie. But
Yeah.
also just the general courage of continuously showcasing what's happening to them and talking about it, and speaking to the world and telling them to talk about it, and not even caring so much about like this idea of receiving aid as much as like this idea of like telling their story and showing it so that people can truly fight for their liberation, while also of course recognizing the need for these resources that are being deprived of them. But I want to talk to you about what that is spiritually. Somebody at one point said, I think I saw this TikTok where it was like, what people don't understand is that we Muslims, we don't care about this life.
Yeah.
We are very focused on, we don't even.
Was it Sbear?
I think it was
K
Sbear,
guy?
but I'm
Yeah,
not.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I love him. Absolutely. He was in Jordan recently. I love him.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
hopefully, I would love to get a chance to talk to him one day. I mean, he's amazing.
Oh, that'd be
Um,
great. I'd love to see him too, honestly. He seems like a fun guy.
Yeah, he does. I'm curious about sort of your perspective on whether it is about, you know, about Islam, but also
Yeah.
just in general about the will and the spirit of your people and how they understand their lives in the context of this.
Yeah. So, in a sense, yeah, I do believe it is Islam because you know me, I'm Muslim and I'm a practicing Muslim and I have been all my life. I was born into it. I didn't like convert or anything. Although sometimes I do think perhaps for like reverts who like revert into Islam, it's like their faith is so much stronger because they chose it.
Yeah,
Um, for me though, I feel like personally I chose it after a while. Like I
yeah,
had some doubts and everything, and then I was like, okay, you know what? I still choose it. And I do think that, yeah, I mean, when it comes to our religion, it's true. We don't care about this life. Like in general, we do not care. Um, because it is a belief that for us, this life is kind of like very, even though it seems long, it's not really long at all, and it's not meant to be all that there is. Like that's what we're taught from a young age. Um, and it's very much like a waiting room
right.
where you're in a waiting room and you're just kind of like trying to see the end, right? And the end is like the other life, like your life in the afterlife after you're dead. That's where your true life begins, I guess. And what you do in this life in the dunya is what decides how your afterlife goes. So the intent is just to be a good person, to practice as to the best of your ability, and just remain resilient in the face of hardship.
Mm.
And I think, you know, there was a discussion, I don't know if you saw it about the word martyr,
Yeah,
where people were like talking about, oh, the word martyr, like you can't use that word, blah, blah, blah. When in Arabic, it doesn't really, I don't think it means what it means in English. Like, I don't know when you hear the word martyr, what do you think? Like for someone who lives in the US, speaks English, does not know Arabic, what do you think of the word martyr?
I have honestly heard there to be two meanings among like Anglo Anglo speakers, which
Okay.
is one of the sense of a person whose life is taken from them or is taken for a higher cause. Obviously, like in Judeo-Christian, like in Christian ideology, it's not ideology. In Christian religion, like Jesus is like the ultimate martyr, and he dies for
Mm,
our sins, right? And so
mm,
there's a particular connotation of somebody in any context who dies unjustly for a higher cause being a martyr, and then there's also a context of somebody. It's a very body politic kind of thing of like, you know, somebody's not a martyr if they don't choose to be a martyr kind of thing,
mm,
which is like to say if somebody's martyred for something, there's a sense of adding a nobility to, and thus a reason for their death, which some people
Mm,
find crass. Like some people find it to
okay.
be like a tapering over things, but it's actually not really that settled in English either, to be honest.
Yeah, 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 I got you. So in Islam, a martyr is there's different conditions to be a martyr. For
Yeah.
one, you die for your country. Like you're in battle, you die, you're a martyr automatically. You drown, you're a martyr.
Right.
You are if you're a woman who is in labor and you die during labor or during giving or while you're giving birth, that's a martyr.
Right.
Um, you're going on your way to work and you die, you're a martyr. You're
Yeah.
going to school, on your way to school, you die, you're a murder, you're a martyr. So it's very much it's basically an umbrella term to include everybody who dies as they are practicing jihad.
Right.
And that's another word that has been misconstrued, the word
Yeah.
jihad. And people think that, oh, jihad is like, you know, when people are like being like violently fighting in the name
Yeah.
of God or whatever, that's also not it. It could be included in it, but that's not really it. Jihad means to strive or to struggle. And for us, jihad is like it's like a daily thing. So if you're studying or working and you're trying to improve your life and just do things with good intentions, that's still jihad. You are striving in your life in the name of God.
Yeah.
If you are someone who is raising your children, you have a family, you're living your life in a way to please God or in the name of God or in the name of your religion, again, that's jihad. So you are fighting for your country. People who are being activists online, who are spreading awareness about the Palestinian cause or what's happening or whatever, that is a form of jihad, as long as you are doing it with that intention, right?
Yeah.
So if you die doing all of those things, um, martyrs are told in Islam, we go automatically to heaven. You just straight ticket to heaven. Like you don't face judgment, you immediately go to heaven and you're it's complete repentance and redemption. You know what I mean? So it's very much a forgiving. I think people have this like very odd image of Islam is like it's all doom and gloom and it's harsh and it's super difficult to practice or super difficult to stick to and commit to. It's really not. It is super forgiving. And I think God has a bigger capacity for forgiveness than humans do. And people often forget that because people don't forgive each other very easily for their sins. But they're not the ones that are meant to do that. And that's what people seem to forget a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And so I think when it comes to faith and to the people who are, be it Muslim or Christian, or even if they have other beliefs, but in general, I think people in Gaza specifically are like very religious and like very committed. And I think I've seen stats about how like they were saying they have like very high literacy. They're all like, it's like 97%. And in every house, there's at least one person that has memorized the Quran, which is something people in other countries, like you barely find people who have memorized anything from the Quran. I used to do it when I was a kid, but I completely forgot everything. Like I don't even know anything right now. But um, I think when you have that community, when you have that unity, that like common belief of like, you know what, these people, they suffered, and once they die, they're straight to heaven, they're at peace, they're good. It kind of gives them like I think a reassurance in a sense of
Yeah.
like you know what we are reassured in this and we are reassured that even though we're suffering we're in the right and
Yeah.
I think that has really helped in a sense for them to have their faith and their resilience strengthened. um but then again I can't obviously speak for any of them. This is all
Yeah.
just like based on knowledge that we have and that we share in our faith. So, yeah,
I think a lot
I
of, sorry to cut you off.
oh no, I'm done.
I think a lot of what, when you talk about these kinds of weird like propaganda pieces about Islam that are so common in the US, whether it's about jihad or other things. Um, there's a kind of a lack of understanding that begets or belies a type of what is really like a kind of dehumanization of really all Arabic peoples, even people who aren't Muslim, because that's people who get grouped in as well. But um, of Islam, of Muslims, because for one, like we understand well, as people in Christian nations, that there are different types of Christianity, and there are
Yeah.
different practices, and so we can easily separate somebody who is, a born again Christian who is, who is from, a more Orthodox Christian background, or somebody who is a Jesuit, like we see it all the time. Someone who's more puritanical, somebody who's like the lapsed Catholic. Like there's so many different types of practices of a religion.
Hmm.
Whereas the same kind of understanding of difference among a community is not offered to Muslims. There is this
Yeah.
understanding like, oh, you're a Muslim, you must do one particular thing, and
No.
I mean,
Yeah.
people
I
would be
hate that.
shocked to find out as well how much difference
There's
and
so
conflict there
many,
is between Muslims
so many
historically.
sects, so many sects, so many. And you know what's funny? My parents are different sects.
Right. Okay. Talk about it.
Yeah. My parents are different sects, and it was they got married during like the worst time because it was like at the time in the 90s. It's pretty intense between Sunnis and Shias,
Right.
and especially for Iraqis and like people in Lebanon and stuff like that. Like it was pretty intense. Like Sunnis didn't like Shias, Shias didn't like Sunnis, and there was also like during Saddam's time in Iraq when he was prime minister, they very much brutalized Shias. He did not like them, and they did not like him. And Sunnis in Palestine or in Jordan, they liked Saddam because he was with their cause, but they completely disregarded the violence and the brutalization of Shias. And my mom, when she moved to Jordan, she very often like didn't tell people that she was Shia. She was like, "Oh no, like I'm Muslim." And then when they ask her, she'd be like, "Oh no, like I don't really care about that." Blah blah blah.
Oh man.
Yeah, then she met my dad, and when she went back to her parents and told them like, "Oh, he's Sunni Palestinian," they're like, "Absolutely not. It's not happening. This is
Right.
not happening." So it was very funny that eventually they made it work, and and in a sense, like that resulted in us growing up in a household where we just didn't care about sects. Like you just do what you want and
Right.
you follow what feels right.
Yeah.
My dad, though, I think he kind of gets a bit like weirded out sometimes still if like we follow something that's like a Shia practice or whatever. So we just like keep it to ourselves.
Could you, I mean, in 5 seconds, can you explain the difference between Shiites and Sunnis? No, not
Oh
5 seconds.
God,
But
I don't know if I can.
if
I
you
don't know if
want,
I
if you'd
can.
like to sort of talk about what that, because usually we only hear about the differences between the two in the context of war, and violent
Yeah,
conflict.
yeah.
Um,
It's very much like I think I'm also not super knowledgeable about it, by the way. Like I'm not like I don't have a lot of information on it. I do know that for Shias, it started off uh during when did it start? It started off when when the Prophet, peace be upon him, passed away. There was the first caliphate that came after him, Abu Bakr. Then after him came another caliphate, which was Umar ibn Khattab. And Umar ibn Khattab, the Shias didn't like him. And that's when I think the it started, like
right.
the conflict, because they believed that Ali, his nephew, what was it? What was he? He was his son-in-law. Ali, the son-in-law of the Prophet, peace be upon him, he was supposed to be the caliphate, not Umar. And they were following his teachings and him specifically,
Hmm.
and they didn't like Umar at all. And that's when I think the origin of the conflict started. Um, and for me, like the differences that I know between them aren't huge, like from what I've seen in my household, at least. because the differences are all very tiny, where the Sunnis follow not only the Quran but also like the Sunnah, which is the words of the Prophet and the different sayings that were transcribed and preserved and studied throughout the centuries and all that.
Right.
As for Shias, what I know about them is that they don't follow any of that. They follow the Quran strictly and only. And there are differences in interpretation, there are differences in practice. So, like, prayer times are different. So,
Right.
the times are the same, but the way they pray them is different. Where Shias group some of them together. So, they pray maybe 3 times a day. Sunnis pray 5 times a day. During fast, when we fast, like Sunnis, they break their fast as soon as the sundown prayer starts. Shias wait until actual sundown when it's dark completely, and that's when they eat. It's just very, very small differences that I see here and there.
Right.
But then again, also it's like centuries and centuries of conflict and violence, and
Right.
so yeah, yeah, yeah. And I
I,
could be wrong. So if anybody knows better in the comments and you want to correct me, you're more than welcome to do
if we
that.
have
I'm no
scholars
expert.
of Islam here, please feel free to interject. Um, I think all this is so fascinating to discuss because there is this often, homogenizing kind of discourse that is had about Arabs in the West. This idea of like, they all believe the same thing and they all do the same things and they all, and then when they do jihad, they want to kill everybody. And it's like this whole kind of very ridiculous, willful disinterest in understanding anything about Muslims.
Yeah,
That to the point, if you know a thing about Islam, people are like, "Wow, like you're so knowledgeable, you're so cultured," and it's just like, I just said
it's
the word
basic
Sunni. Like I
insulting.
don't. It's just so, and it's an Orientalism, right? To invoke another famous Palestinian, but it's also a sense of it really is a part of a dehumanization that it occurs to people of all, oppressed backgrounds.
Yeah,
That something that is, normal is something that follows the sort of blueprint that is impacted in a Western society that comes from this and this religious background, and then other stuff is just like exotic or it's weird or it's different, and I
yeah,
think part of that also it becomes uh, a factor in why people have been so reticent to talk about Palestine, right? And so reticent to talk about, especially before recent events, but just reticence to try to dive into it because there's an understanding like, oh, this is very complicated conflict. Oh, it's so
yeah,
complicated, and they've been fighting for centuries, those people, and it's probably never going to happen. And what's interesting about when somebody brings you to the table or someone like you to the table to talk about it, you can see that it's just like a very real thing that happened within the lifetimes of your family, like
yeah.
continuous things that are like occurring politically that have occurred for some years that have a real effect. It's not just all like this ancient history that is so steeped in so complexity and tradition that we'll never understand it as Westerners. It's just like this same thing that you might understand about your families and other people's families. And what's scary too in the U.S. is how often we're brainwashed into acting like it's not there, into not
Hmm.
realizing that like for Irish Americans, there's such a history of oppression that's there, of genocide and colonization that's there, because it gets stored into this other part of this other part of this other part, and that's not really important. What's more, it's important is what
Yeah,
your grandma used to eat for breakfast. It's like this kind
yeah,
of
yeah.
apoliticization. And do you feel like
1 second, sorry. I'm just gonna cut you off for a second. My cat is like yelling. Hold
okay,
on.
okay, it's cat time.
Like,
Thank you to everybody who's been in the chat, by the way. Let me listen, but yeah.
this is Darcy. Hold on.
Darcy,
Here he is. Hi.
what's up? It's a great cat name.
Yeah. My sister named him after, of course, Mr. Darcy.
Mm.
And he's very much an aristocrat.
Oh,
I
an
can't. Yeah.
aristocrat.
All right,
Um,
sorry. Yeah, keep going.
yeah, I think my general point was, let me see if I can retract where I was going. My general point is, I was going to ask about the relationship that you and your family have had with politics. For a lot of us in
Mm,
the West, for instance, and you've been a Westerner too, so you know this. Um, like a lot of people just, you don't talk about politics at the table, and
yeah.
all this, everything is so
Yeah.
complicated, and everything is something you got to see on the news, and then this news and this news. And for you, I think there's an understanding for a lot of Palestinian people of like we talk about this out of the womb, and
Yeah.
there's a thing that we're standing behind, right?
Yeah. 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 So yeah, politics is very much embedded into our lives, like all the time. Like be it my dad's family, my mom's family. Like some people don't like to talk about it, but not because it's not because oh like they don't want to like they just don't want to talk about it is mainly due to trauma. So
Right.
my grandpa, for example, from my mom's side, doesn't like to talk about it because their family was in politics and it
Hmm.
had some real repercussions on the family and like threats
Yeah.
and stuff. So he just likes to stay quiet. My grandma, on the other hand, every time we're sitting anywhere, be it at like a guest's house or relative's house or Eid, just a regular dinner, Ramadan, I don't know, it does not matter. She does not care. She will just talk about politics all the time and then she'll start yelling and get really heated. Um and at home we talk about it a lot all the time. My mom has the same reaction as my grandpa of like I don't want to talk about it. And yeah, and it's just yeah, it's very much embedded. Like I still remember when we were kids, we lived in another neighborhood where a bunch of other Palestinian families were staying. Do you know the comedian Mo Amer?
Yeah.
My dad told me he's from the same neighborhood. Like he was
Hmm.
living there for a while. But I didn't know. And it was known for like different Palestinian families. So we would sit there in the summers with my uncles who would visit from the US and stuff. And we would just sit and they would tell us all these different stories about living in Palestine or like dealing with the war or like then going to Jordan and dealing with the war there like
Hmm.
right after. Oh like I remember when your dad got shot at one time and then I had to carry him while he was barefoot and like run across to our house and they're laughing and I'm like what? Like this is to them this is childhood. It's memories. You know what I mean? And then we start to talk about the politics of it and everything. So yeah, it has always been a thing that we discuss and talk about very regularly and it's not and I think the difference between that and like politics in the US is like I think the way that people discuss it in like North America is like who are you voting for? This party or that party and the politics between those two parties and legislation and stuff like that and this bill and that bill, you know what I mean? And
Right.
it's less about, oh, who's gonna attack us now? It's more like,
Well.
who are we going to to attack next? You know what I mean?
Right.
And stuff like that. So
Right. Yeah, the stakes of it are quite different, but also like
yeah.
there's a historicization like that. Frankly, like the average U.S. family simply has no interest or curiosity, or it's not even necessarily their fault. Just no real education in political history. Even when you get taught it in school, it's in this very, very depoliticized and very, very matter of fact, freedom kind of way.
Yeah.
And the difference for you and with your family is the ability to sit there and be like, well, I remember what this person did, and I remember what this person did, and I remember the Oslo Accords, and I remember this thing and this thing and this, like you can remember,
Yeah.
like, and there's a historical narrative, like an understanding of how things connect with each other over time, rather than just like, well, what do you think about this tax rate? Which
Yeah.
doesn't, you don't have any kind of historical discussion of what these laws are about, then you probably don't even understand them very well anyway.
Yeah. 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 And there's also like even in schools now that you mentioned like learning about it. In our school system, like all we learn about is not all, but majority of what we learn about is the Palestinian cause. Is he on my bed?
Yes.
Is the Palestinian cause and the history of it and how did it happen and who caused what and who did what and who signed what with who and
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And we do learn about World War I and World War II. So we do take all of it. It's very much like a, but there is a focus on Palestinian freedom, the Palestinian cause, the
Yeah.
occupation, Jordan's involvement, and it's always been done in a way where like everybody is like Jordan is with Palestine always. You know what I mean? At least that's how we were taught. And then we take Arabic class, and the literature is completely resistance poetry. Just it's
Mm.
resistance poetry, political poetry, and then we start to discuss it again. So that's like two out of all the other classes where we discuss politics and learn about it and the history and everything. So,
Can you talk
uh,
about what the literature and the poetry is, like some of the names?
so Mahmoud Darwish, obviously, he's a big one. We talk about him a lot. We studied him a lot. There's Ghassan Kanafani. Um, he also was great, and we took I remember a novel by him when I was in seventh, eighth grade,
Hmm.
or a short story, and it was called in Arabic, أرض البرتقال الحزين, which is the land of the sad
Hmm.
oranges, orange. I don't know how it would translate exactly, but yeah. And um, we took those two mainly. We did take Al-Mutanabbi, which is like a super old Arab poet. It has nothing to do with like resistance poetry or whatever. This guy was like ancient poetry, like time of like the time of the prophet, I think,
Right.
around then. I could be wrong, but that's how I remember it. Um, there's also one of my favorite poets personally, Tamim Barghouthi. He's still alive. He taught, I think, political science at Georgetown for a bit.
Hmm.
I have no idea where he is right now. I think he's like on the run. And he writes incredible poetry. The reason I know about him is because my uncle, God rest his soul, told me about him when I was in college, when I just started, and I wasn't sure which route to go, management, business, or literature. And then we were sitting at dinner, and he's like, "Oh, like listen to this poem." And it was a video of Tamim reciting one of his poems, and I was just hooked ever since. Like, I just kept researching him and listening to his poetry, and I'm like, you know what? Like the way that I feel right now about this, like there has to be something there. And it kind of pushed me to go for literature in a sense, kind of like dictated my whole career. But he had a poem that is about 10 minutes long, and it's about Jerusalem.
Hmm.
And I'm telling you, Elliot, I have been listening to this poem for about 7 to 8 years, or like 7 to 6 years. And every time I listen to this poem, I cry. Like, I can't, like, it's so good. I end up crying every single time because the way that he just describes Jerusalem and Palestine and the fight for freedom and resistance and the sadness that one can feel when visiting an occupied land that belongs to them is so tangible and it's beautiful. There's this one line he said where um it has something to do with the doves or the pigeons around Jerusalem, and then he's like this land is so free that or will fight for freedom so much that a dove will fly in the air and declare a state in between two bullets. And that's
Wow.
one of the lines in the poem. And it's and he talks about the history and the culture and the different civilizations that have passed through Jerusalem, that have passed through Palestine, because it is the center, in my opinion, the center of the world. You know, it is that point in the world that it connects the southeast or like the southern side or the eastern side of the globe to the western side. It connects, the Levant to Europe to Africa. It's very much, that connecting land. And so many different civilizations have actually passed through it. And he says in the poem that there's not a single person that has not stepped foot on this land. You think it has narrowed down to you and to them? Is like this will all go away one day. It'll go away and a new civilization will rise and you will be here again. And then the end of the poem, my favorite part is basically um the Aqsa talking to the Palestinian man that is visiting and who's crying as he's walking away. And she's basically telling him, like, don't cry, you who lives on the margins of the history pages. Um, it everybody may be in Jerusalem, but I don't see anyone in Jerusalem but you. And it's just
Wow.
it's so beautiful. Yeah.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
incredible. You should send me a
Yeah.
link to that.
Definitely. I wish I could find a translation that's like good enough for it. And if I
Mm.
don't, I'd love to translate it myself
Mm.
because it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. I read it once in poetry class because we were taking like indigenous poetry and I just wished I could like teach everybody their Arabic just so they could get it.
I mean, I would love to learn some Arabic. If it comes to that, just send it to me in Arabic, and I'll start trying to piece things together.
All right.
That's how
Will
you learn
do.
languages. That's how you learn.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
find a
Yeah. Yeah.
word, and you're like, I know that word.
And you're more than welcome to come spend time here and learn Arabic as well.
Oh, that's such an honor.
Immersion.
That would be a tremendous honor to me. I want to
Yeah.
pivot, unfortunately, to the last sort of section of this interview because
Yeah, yeah, no problem.
there's a couple of things I wanted to go over that we were talking about as well, and in particular, I wanted to kind of move a bit back to where we were talking about the discussions you were having with your family,
Yeah.
because you were, and this we talked about before the stream, Justin, you've been having these conversations with your family, of course, over the past month and even prior, about sort of political issues, about the strategy, about the matter, like about
Yeah.
military situations ongoing, and all of this. And I would be curious just to hear first, like, what kind of things your family is, what you're talking about, and what kind of ideas you guys are kind of talking about.
Yeah, so basically, hold on, people are asking for a link to the poem. I'll
Yeah,
post it right after. I'll
I'll
post
put it
it.
in my community post as well.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so basically, and a lot of what I'm saying and what we talked about has a lot to do also with the same poet that I talked about because he did study political science and like went on to do a lot of research and he's an analyst. So he
Mm,
also analyzed a lot of this and he keeps posting these very long-winded um videos that I've shared on my Twitter before,
mm,
but have not translated for like security reasons and we don't want this to like spread like wildfire. So,
okay.
but basically, it is so Hamas picked a specific time to strike, right? They did not tell anybody. They did not, they didn't publicize it. Nobody knew. None of the other resistances or like resistance forces in the area had any idea. And this was confirmed by Hezbollah during the speech that happened a few days ago on Friday, I think it was Friday, a couple days ago. Yeah. Um, and the idea was that they struck at a time when the government was shaky. The political situation there right now, the landscape's a bit shaky, it's uncertain, nobody knows what's going on. Um, So they picked a time when Israel was at their weakest. That's number one. And two is the fact that they I don't know if their purpose is to liberate Palestine entirely with
Mm,
this war, but if they don't, if that's the case and they don't, I think at least there will be points. They will be points ahead of Israel of like, okay, we've weakened them a bit.
right.
We've gained some leverage, we've gained some advantage. Now we know, right?
Right.
And Hamas specifically, they have been involved with wars, in wars with the IOF since 2008, I think, if before that. And with every war, every single war, um, they either kind of, how do I explain this? So with every war, despite the result, they come back stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And mind you, this is a resistance inside of like a concentration camp. There's a blockade, a siege. Like people have no idea how they're managing this. And if they're managing to do this much damage with such little material and such little support and so much restriction, imagine what they could do with like a fully funded, blockade free type of freedom, right? And ability. So, and one thing that he did mention that was interesting is that when you have a fight between a regular army and a guerrilla army, or people who are resistance fighters or freedom fighters, the goal for a regular army is to win entirely. That is their goal, and they cannot lose it because the people of that government are depending on them to do that, to win entirely and and to do it as quickly as possible because they can't afford to have a long-winded war, right? For guerrilla fighters and freedom fighters, their goal and the way for them to win is to make sure that the regular army loses and
Mm-hmm.
doesn't win. You know what I mean? So the stakes for them aren't as high as it is for
Yeah.
the IOF, right?
Yeah.
Because they're spending billions, and it's not only on their dime, it's the US's
The
dime as
U.S. is
well,
done.
right? And there's only so much support that they can give before they risk an entire revolution or a coup or whatever, like a complete chaos. And people are already mad. Now, when it comes to the IOF, their forces are around 600,000. They've got 250 that are regular, like active duty soldiers, and then 350 reservists. And in total, yeah, I guess it goes to up about like 500 to 600,000 in total for their army. So for Hamas to take that on alone is not enough because for Hamas, I think they have about at least 40,000.
Mm-hmm.
And despite how good they are in ground combat,
Sorry.
bless you.
Thank you.
Despite how good they are in ground combat, there's been a ton of airstrikes, as we can see, and
Right.
the losses are pretty huge. Um, and where was I? Yeah. So Hamas can't take on that many people on their own.
Right.
So Hezbollah coming in
Yeah.
from the north has helped a lot in terms of strategy because um, they're able to kind of divert a number of that force up towards the north. And Hezbollah mentioned it in Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah mentioned it in his speech on Friday.
Right.
He said basically the numbers are we've have a third of the ground military soldiers on the ground diverted to the north, half the fleet, the nautical fleet, a really good portion of the Air Force, all diverted to the north so as to not overwhelm Hamas in the south, right? Now the idea is that they could things could get a lot better and they could win much easier if the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank get involved. The Palestinian Authority in the West Bank are basically armed Palestinian citizens
Mm.
who are under Abbas, the Palestinian president, and they're also kind of like they're the same as the Palestinian Liberation Organization, Fatah. They're basically they used to be Fatah, or they still are. I'm not sure anymore, honestly, but they're about 60,000
Mm.
supposedly. And they are armed and they basically run the West Bank along with the IOF. They
Mm.
have like agreements in between them. If they were to go against the Israeli government and mute and have a mutiny, or with the support of, oh, hello, or with the, that's my cat, or with the support of the president to just go against the government, the Israeli government, and fight, then you have another diversion of the forces in the West Bank, right? And that altogether happening for a while will completely drain Israel's economy and their workforce. Because again, the Israelis that live in Israel are all reservists. They are all in the IDF. There's not a single civilian amongst them. Not really. Everybody has served, or is serving,
Or will serve.
and or will serve.
You
Yes.
know, aside from the cases of people who will defect.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the idea is that their economy is still already shaky. It's
Right.
already shaky. And there are reports coming out now that it's getting even worse. They cannot afford to have a very long-winded war where everybody is involved, where they send all their soldiers. And I think what Hamas is doing is they're trying to take it slow and steady, where they're killing as much as they can of the soldiers,
Yeah.
and they're trying to incur as many losses as possible, both both to their numbers and to their like tanks and weaponry and jets and whatnot, in order to drain them economically.
Right.
And then yeah, and then force like a whole collapse. And the eventually, if there is a collapse and things are unsafe and it's not working, people who have dual citizenships, they're gonna pack up and leave. They're not
Right.
gonna stay. You know, they've already left, a bunch of them.
Right.
You know, right now the airport is completely, I've seen like articles and pictures of the report of the airport being completely empty and deserted. So, I mean, this is all just analysis, like it's scenarios, right? Of what the political analyst that I saw has been saying and what everybody has been really talking about lately. Um, you know, and this will only work if, like, for example, the PA get involved, and they
Mm.
haven't been. You know, they haven't been getting involved. They're actually helping the IOF in certain cases, which is really disheartening. But
Right.
literally an hour ago, before our live stream, there was a statement that they put out saying like, oh, if what did they say? They said, oh, we give Abbas, the president, 24 hours to give us an order to go against the Israeli government. And if you don't, but this time tomorrow, we will have a mutiny and we'll take things into our own hands.
Wow.
So, yeah. So if I don't know how it's going to work out. The problem is there's a lot of complexities when it comes to this,
Yeah.
especially among like the Arab region, like Arab countries, because we've got Egypt. People in Egypt are upset because the people are with Palestine and they want to come in and they're protesting and they want to help and they want to let aid through. But Sisi, the president, is not budging at all. Netanyahu is not budging. Saudi Arabia, Emirates, like everybody, all the Arab
Right.
countries, none of them are doing anything at all except like having meetings and talking and whatever. You know that they have like an emergency summit. Do you know when that summit is?
I don't.
November 11th. An emergency summit, November 11th. That's
It's
like a
like
week
a
away.
week from now. Yeah.
A week from now, and it was announced last week.
Ah, what an emergency.
Like everybody was like, what are you doing? Like, so in a sense, it's disheartening for people in Gaza where they're feeling like, okay, the Arab world isn't with us, but the people are. It's the
People are.
government that is the problem. And there's a lot of agents um, of the state online that are trying to rile people up and like create discord between different Arabs, like of different
Right.
nationalities. And people are trying really hard to kind of fight against that because if there's discord between the people,
Then that makes it easier.
is it makes it easier, right? So I think one of the most important things is to make sure that Arab people remain unified, that they remain a community together, that they remain sympathetic and empathetic with one another. And again, for people or allies in the West to keep pushing financially and protest, because there has been word from the White House saying how the protest will not be it will be untenable for to deal with this for more than a couple of weeks,
Yeah.
you know, if months, they can't deal with this much pressure for too long. But I
Yeah.
think people just need to be persistent, consistent, patient, and go for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah. So also one last thing, there is, and this is a worry for Jordanians specifically, why we're kind of stressed out, is there is something called the Popular Mobilization Forces. In Arabic, it's al-Hashd al-Shabi. And they are this Shia militia that is Iran, no, it's Iraq state sponsored and backed by Iran, I think. And it consists of about 67 brigades, which is a lot, all throughout the region. And Hezbollah in the north, in Lebanon, are part of them. They're one of the brigades. So a bunch of them from Iraq are at our borders. Like hundreds of them are at our borders right now with Iraq, trying to get through in order to get to Palestine. And the military has been at our border with Iraq for a while, trying to like repel them and tell them to go another way and not come in, because as great as it is that they want to go in and like go hell, they could go through Lebanon. They have passage through there
Right.
because that's where their other brigade is. So everybody's like, why are they so insistent on coming in through our side? Because if they come in, it's going to be a lot of problems.
Yeah.
We have a lot of open space, we have a lot of desert space, and you never know who's going to be in there or what they're going to do, and you can't keep track of everybody. So it would be really, really, really bad if they come in, and so that's been a bit stressful
Yeah.
in that sense. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And
because Israel has not, much of what Israel has done has not been exclusive to, Palestine itself. Yeah, it has
oh
not been
no, not at all. Not at all.
historically even. It's been a matter of imposing violence across the Middle East, of course, under the guise of like going after Palestinian, quote unquote terrorists, etc., etc. But it's
Yeah,
very much
yeah.
an issue that has affected Lebanon, affected everybody. Horrific violence in many instances.
And you know what? They have stated publicly that they intend to take it.
They want to take Lebanon.
They want to take Lebanon. And
Yeah.
during a conference that happened in Paris, like peace talks or something that happened in Paris last year, one of their financial minister in Israel literally went up on a podium with a map of Israel that included Jordan. Everybody was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
What? Like you want to take Jordan too? And they do have a plan. They want to take Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, parts of Saudi Arabia. That's their plan. So,
It's just
um,
it's so
it's
bizarre
worrisome.
because it's not only like just so disgusting, but it's also like how are you gonna do that? Like you can barely do what you're doing now, and now you want to go
I
take
don't
parts
know,
of
man.
Saudi Arabia. Like you want to take what? Um,
Yeah,
but
yeah. I
then at
don't
the same
know.
time, people want to be oh, if you say from the river to the sea, I mean that's obviously equating with the you want to genocide Jewish people. When then Israeli officials can be like, we are going to literally take all like 50 countries militarily, and people can just
Yeah,
be like, well, I mean,
yeah. And it's crazy because people can tell why. Like they know why they're doing it. They want to build the canal first, the
right,
the the canal through Palestine, so that they don't have to use the Suez Canal anymore and not give money to
Egypt and
Egypt. Two, there has been oil and natural gas found off the coast of Gaza. So they already contracted 6 companies for it. They're so sure that they're gonna win and that they're gonna take it. And I think that's also kind of the reason why the US is backing this so hard. They want a piece of that
Absolutely.
oil, and that gas. And the thing is that, okay, Jordan is a pretty big country and like, much bigger than Palestine. And we do have good military and good intelligence. And we have a lot of also like armed tribesmen and tribes that exist. I mean, everybody's armed here.
Yeah.
But the thing is that we cannot, I don't think we can survive a blockade or a siege because we do not have resources. We
Mm,
depend on US aid.
mm.
So it's yeah, it's difficult. I don't know. We'll see what happens. We sit together sometimes, my family and I, and we think, okay, what are some contingencies that we can take if there's a war? Like,
In
what do we
Jordan.
do? Because not all of us have Western passports. Like, there are members of my family that only have Jordanian passports, and it's difficult to go anywhere with that. So we're looking up like different countries that take the Jordanian passport for a while, like without a visa. Like,
Yeah.
where can you go? And yeah, man, it's so dark-sided having to think about stuff like this. And yeah.
It's incredibly horrific,
Yeah.
and scary. At the same
Yeah.
time, it seems like you've been throughout this conversation and throughout this you've had this complex mix of like at times very optimistic and then at times very very like worried.
Yeah, that's basically it. I think, yeah. Because optimistic because this is the most attention Palestine has ever gotten. You know what I mean? Like in 75 years we have never had this much global support. And there's a real chance there.
Yeah.
And this is the strongest attack I think so far, or the strongest yeah, the strongest kind of like pushback from Hamas to Israel, right? It's like
Yeah.
the most damage that they've had. And the PR campaign isn't working
It's not.
at all. The propaganda, that illusion, that veil, it has been lifted, it's gone. So in that sense, I'm very hopeful. Worried because this could go either way, like this could really go either way. We have no clue. And also clearly very worried about the people in Gaza. Like it's just so heartbreaking seeing all of it and then and it happening so close and I just wish I could go myself. You know what I mean? Like it's just right there, like take a car and go. Like it's a few hours away. But realistically, you can't,
You can't.
just a few meters away from the border, you get shot. Like there's no way. So I don't know. I hope it works out soon and that there's a ceasefire and that there's aid. If they have a ceasefire and aid comes through, there's real hope,
Yeah.
honestly. There is real hope. So,
Right. I
yeah.
I think the last sort of question on that note is to talk about what we can do, right?
Oh,
And we,
okay.
as in the two of us, but also as in people from around the world in solidarity with Palestine. There's a constant feeling of, not being sure if there's anything we can do to have any effect. But at the
Yeah,
same
yeah, yeah.
time, we are hearing, as you're saying, that a lot of the stuff that is being done right now, a lot of the protesting and the advocation, and the using of voices and the boycotts as well, a lot of it is having an impact.
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
it a
yeah.
matter of just continuing on this path as long as
Absolutely.
possible?
Absolutely. I think, okay, so I think it's definitely to continue boycotting and I think I should really emphasize everyone to like really follow the BDS list. Do not go on a boycott of like everything and all of it. And you know what I mean? Like we want to have a targeted effort towards these specific companies. And BDS have been at this for a very, very long time. Um, and someone asked, can you provide sources for the claim that Israel wants the land of other Arab states? There have been clips of them
Yeah.
saying it.
It's
And so
it's
yeah,
surfaced on
you'll
social media.
yeah, yeah, you can definitely see that on Twitter. Um and they've it was recent actually. I think it's with the army like all huddled together and saying, "Oh, we're going to take Lebanon." And And again, there was that picture of what's his face, the financial minister with that map of Jordan. But yeah, going back to it. So follow the BDS list, stick to it, keep boycotting, boycott for forever. Honestly, if you can boycott forever, do
Yeah.
it. There are so many other options that you can, because if you follow the list, it's only just a couple of companies. It's not everything. So you are able to find replacements and buy something else.
Right.
Um, Secondly, keep talking about it, be an advocate, be loud, and try and teach people around you, educate them on the occupation, what's happening to Palestinians, because the more people know, I think the more that they'll be inclined to help themselves. And, the more the merrier. We need to have more people. Three, the protests. Please go out to the protests in your cities. Try and find what's going on in your city and keep pushing. You know what I mean? Um, and because these protests are helping a lot right now, and even though it's going to take some time, I think it can do a lot of good. Last
Absolutely.
thing, yeah,
Sorry, I'm just
last,
putting a couple of things in the
yeah, yeah,
chat.
yeah. No, no,
That's
I got that. No worries. Last thing is, where is it? Oh, they're saying Jordan renounced its claim to the territory in 1988, became the second Arab state to sign a peace treaty. Man, look, Israel does not give a shit about any peace treaties. I'm gonna be real with you. They do not care. Even if there's a ceasefire that's gonna happen, like even if a ceasefire happens soon with Gaza, they will break it in the same day. Do not be surprised if they do. They do this every single time.
Yep.
Um,
It's happened
so
before. It'll happen again.
yeah, 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 every single time. Yeah, so again, protesting, BDS, and educate the people around you. Please, 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 please. And again, remember, this is a lifelong fight. This is not like a couple of weeks, month type thing. This is forever. So, go ahead and I appreciate your support. So, yeah, that'd be great. There are other things that I have in mind that I think would be a lot more drastic, but I don't think people are ready for those drastic measures just yet. I think baby steps is where it's at.
Yeah. The group is the organization is Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. There's many
Hmm.
websites. If you can't access their official website, some are saying they can't access the link in the chat. Then looking up the organization name, there's many different articles and many different kind of coalitions with different groups that they have with it. Um, and
Darcy, could you not?
Darcy's like, I have some things to say as well.
Yeah.
Even the cats are opinionated.
Yeah.
Um, yes, I mean, this has been an amazing conversation. I do think I'm going to choose to be optimistic and say that this is going to continue.
I hope
Um,
so.
I think I'm optimistic because I'm pessimistic, because I think people feel so fucked right now, and because
Yeah.
things are so turbulent in so many ways that people are just much more open to continuously putting these efforts of resistance forward. And if it doesn't happen in this moment, then there will just be another situation that happens down the line wherein this is going to restoke again, and people will, I mean, this is just the way it has happened. Is the protests will get larger and larger the next time, right? And that's just the question of how will we get there. But either way, I do feel that this isn't going anywhere. I'm not going to, you know, like I want to continue to keep people on the gas pedal, people's feet on the gas pedal for this, to
Yeah.
talk about this and to do so. There's so many people who are sacrificing so much for this. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
Jewish Voice for Peace and this protest that they've staged one in Grand Central and other parts of the U.S. Not in our name, like getting arrested, being harassed on all these different things, just for the sole purpose of using their voice, and the effect that it's having. We have to stay strong about this and recognize that we're doing something, and doing something isn't just about seeing the end goal that you want to have immediately. It's about doing it because it's the process, and trusting that process, and feeling happy knowing that as long as you are trusting it and doing your best, that's all that matters. Not that you
Yeah.
have to, you know, like there's so much of an emphasis, I think that's a very Western thing of like, well, how are we going to sort it out immediately, you know, and how is it going to do this and this and this and this and this, and it's like, for
Yeah.
people who understand oppression, they recognize that that's not the way to look at it, because you know, as much as we do want there to be some sort of end goal, the end goal isn't even the end goal, right? The
Yeah.
ceasefire is at all the end, and then even in the end of even in the events of the end of an occupation, that wouldn't be the end. There is no end.
That, yeah.
We just
Yeah,
fight,
yeah.
and then we die, and then our next lives we fight again. You know?
Yeah. I think when it comes to this fight also specifically, like there's a lot of like it challenges a lot of your perceptions of how society should go and how it should work and just the status quo, you know, like there's just a lot of questioning now, I think, from a lot of people also, that has been triggered by the BDS movement as well. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, yeah, people I think are really rethinking, okay, like how are we living exactly? And also the fact that, you know, um, the way that the like things are going legally with the UN, like, okay, people make resolutions and they vote on them, but then the US vetoes everything. So how is this working exactly? Like what is going on? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think more people are waking up to this and are able to see where the flaw is and where the problems are. Um, but I do want to also add one more thing that people should do is that remember that with physical displacement comes a cultural displacement and an erasure of the history. So if you have time and you can, um, you know, please learn about the culture, about the history, support your Palestinian friends and Palestinian businesses and people because I think, you know, it's pretty hard right now. So, um, and because a lot of, you know, Israelis are trying to hijack the culture as well and the food. So just de try and see what our culture is all about, you know, before they take it. And yeah, that's what I have to say.
Palestinian culture is gorgeous. Palestinian cuisine is some of the best in the world.
I love
Palestinian
it.
people are the best people in the world.
Thank you.
I also will close by saying, for one, because there's been some folks in the chat with curiosities and questions. There's books and there are talks that you should check into on on this website. In particular, I'll type in the name for Rashid Khaldi and his book, The 100 Years War on Palestine,
Oh yeah,
which
yeah.
has been a bestseller for multiple weeks, and has been a central book that people have been talking about currently. But it's just an incredible work of synthesizing so many different events in Palestinian history under a sort of discussing this overall narrative of how this colonization has worked. I will also recommend Ilan Pappé, who is a former Israeli soldier who is a historian who defected from Israel and has been a vocal resistor of Zionism, and somebody who has uncovered several different things in Israeli history that got him in significant trouble with Israeli authorities, including the Tandoor massacre. And his talks on YouTube are extensive. He talks in a very serious and easy to understand way. Edward Said is also a name. There's many names, right? And
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
all out there if you want it. That's the
Yeah,
question is, do you want to know or not? You know?
yeah. I'll share the link for that poem that I talked about that some people wanted. It's in Arabic, so I don't know. If you find I'll try and find the translation or oh, do links not work? They can
Oh yeah,
copy
you
it
can't
though.
send the link because if you're not, that's a whole thing. Just send the link to
Okay.
me, and I'll put it either. I'll put it in the chat now, and then I'll put it on community posts as well.
Okay.
Gotcha. So this is a YouTube link.
What?
It's a YouTube link, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, it's this. This is what you sent. Excellent.
Oh, there it is. All right.
Um, okay.
Uh,
Well, Taffy, this has been a 2-hour conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank
I
you for
enjoyed
coming
this a
on.
lot.
This is great,
Thank
honestly.
you.
It was so great, and
Yeah.
I would love
Yeah, I
to.
had a good time.
I look
Yeah,
forward to
yeah.
having you on again at some point. So
Inshallah,
don't be
hopefully.
a
Yeah, yeah,
stranger,
yeah.
inshallah.
I won't.
Ojalá.
And Ahlin. But yeah, don't be a stranger either. Like honestly, you have my number. Text me whenever.
Of
Let's hang
course.
out. Let's talk. Well, we can't hang out, but let's talk.
Well, one day,
One day.
if
Yeah,
the
yeah.
offer stays on, I'll come. I'll come to Amman.
Oh yeah, it's definitely an open invitation. You're more than welcome to come. I know all the best shawarma spots, the best falafel
Let's
spots.
go. That's
Like
all I need
I
to hear.
got you.
I'm there
I
already.
got you. I got you.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay.
And thanks to everyone here. It was nice meeting you, everyone. I hope this was informative and helpful. And yeah, keep fighting the good fight and keep heart.
Yes.
So
And thank you all for coming. Have a good one.
good night.